Moving on, Eric Blake says, hey, Bill. Hey, Eric. Here's a Saving California question in honor of that recent event. You've talked a lot about the annoying, to put it mildly, trend of lefties leaving the crumbling economies of the blue states for the more prosperous red states, only to vote for the exact same policies that screwed up their old states in the first place. We all hate it, but how do we fight it? Let me make sure I'm recording here, just as a quick little aside. Yes, we seem to be. Okay. Seeing as there seems to be no way to really play defense on this, I say it's high time we give them a dose of their own medicine. Conservatives from solid red states moving into California and maybe New York, but especially California, turn their strongholds purple for a change. Obviously, our brave knights errant would have to be unmarried, because otherwise we have the issue of, oh, I have my family to look after and I can't ask them to take on the financial burden of the taxes and the regulations, not to mention the real estate. So is my plan at all feasible, or is there some other way to fight the blue invasion? It's a great idea, Eric, and I always like the idea of going on offense. I've always hated the idea of just constantly slowing down this inexorable, retreat. But it certainly doesn't seem to be feasible in terms of California, because if you're talking about adding red dye to the existing blue dye, and you have a limited amount of red dye, then you're going to want the smallest flask that you can possibly get, right? If I have a swimming pool that's blue and I've got a cup of red, and I pour it into a swimming pool, it's not going to make a whole lot of difference. If I have a thimbleful of blue and I pour in a cup of red, well, you're going to have a whole lot of things happening there. So by my analysis that way, California would be the worst possible place to try, because there are so many people here, and there are so many people that conservatives would have to overwhelm to turn this state red. Now, that said, anybody who's half a person, really, if you have any sense of identity, or, I mean, frankly, if you haven't done this, I don't know how you can face yourself. So everybody here certainly has played Risk before, right? I mean, the idea that there's a Stratosphere Lounge viewer who's never at least seen Risk or played Risk once or twice is just inconceivable to me. There are many different rules variations for Risk, but and the worst of which is the ever-increasing cards thing, by the way, which means that you can be down to your last territory, take one thing, and now that the game's been going on for 19 hours, you get 60,000 units or something. But in any event, I digress. When you're playing Risk, you have the entire board of all the territories in the world, and one by one, each player gets to pick a territory, and this goes round and round and round until all the territories are taken. I used to go for the three corners of America. I wanted North America so badly, but I realized that the soundest strategy is to lock up Australia and just build there and keep a base and just keep getting this constant two and let everybody else fight it out, and then come storming out of the Australian stronghold and essentially burn the world down. But I digress again. But in any event, in Risk, you get the entire map of the world and all the different territories, and one by one, everybody gets to pick which one they want, and it goes until the board is full. And because of that experience, which I've had so many times, I've often wondered what it would be like if the map of the United States was that way. And if the United States was up for grab between red teams and blue teams, I would pick California first. I'd pick Texas second, but I'd pick California first. If I had to start again, and we could have it at the first pick of the states in the union, I'd pick California first. And if I couldn't get that, I might pick Washington State second, and because we need access to the ocean. I'm hoping if the progressives went first, they'd be just, in tears over it, but they would go with New York. But in any event, I have given a great deal of thought to the idea of this kind of dividing up of the country, which I can't see any feasible way for it to happen, although strange things have happened in the past. But if there was I'll just come out and say this. I know it's going to offend a lot of people. On some level, I would rather have California than any other 20 states combined, I think. Uh, I think California as a republic, as a conservative country, just California, would kick some butt because it's so amazing. Everybody's constantly saying, well, why are you here? Why are you here? I ask myself this all the time, and then I step outside and it's 66 degrees and 12% humidity, and I'm contributing to the 12% humidity because if it weren't for me, it'd be 0% humidity here in Los Angeles. I meant to say humidity actually, but you can see the great feat of prestidigitation I just did there. So California won't work. I have heard people say that Vermont is attractive, that Vermont is actually relatively conservative, and unlike California, Vermont is a small population. If you could you could take a movable number of conservatives, put them into someplace like Vermont, and and keep it red, for quite a long time. You could do the same thing with any of these other states like Montana or Wyoming, which are already red because they're not filled with people. So the problem really isn't even turning the state red. The problem is being left alone. I know it's a sad thing to say, but I have given this some thought. And I would, if one state were to secede from the Union and take the Constitution with it, that being the operative condition, obviously. If one state were to leave the Union and say, we're leaving the Union and we're taking the Constitution with us, because obviously the people who are running the federal government of the United States of America don't believe in this document anymore, so we are going to proclaim the Republic of whatever, I would move there instantly. And I think whatever state or states that were or was would rapidly be outproducing the rest of the country. And many times I think about this because the idea of having two different countries, a red and blue America, would really make my job a lot easier, make my life a lot more pleasant too. If you had a red America and a blue America, you would have very clear results in a very short time. You would basically say, okay, half of the country is going to run on the blue model, the other half of the country is going to run on the red model. But make your choice now, because once you've chosen, you don't get to cross. You don't get to vote for California because you want to show everybody how much, your fundraisers for the Guatemalan water snake, you don't get to have all that virtue signaling, realize what a catastrophe it is, and then move. You have to decide, and then you have to stick with that decision. And if we were to have something like that, again, which I don't foresee happening, I can't imagine how it would happen, but if it did happen just for the sake of the thought experiment, we would be living in a very interesting place. It's actually very funny in a lot of ways, or charming anyway, to think about what would happen if it really was like, if there really was a case where there was like the North and the South. There were a lot of people during the Civil War, not a lot, but certainly some who moved, right? People who had Confederate leanings moved into the Confederacy, people with Union loyalties went north, and so on. Some of that happened, I don't know how much, but some of it did. But if you were to basically say to everybody, hey, look, you get to pick one or the other, what would you pick? Here's the blue model, here's the red model. I suspect most of the population would go to the blue model because most of the population is what makes up the blue model. Most of the city people would move to the blue country because that's where all the benefits would be. I don't think there'd be an awful lot of benefits in red America. There would be a safety net which would be designed to catch people so they didn't starve on the street, but it would not be a hammock, and we all know what we could do in a country of our own, I think. But then what gets interesting is what does life in those countries look like? What does it actually look like? Which is why it's such an interesting idea, such a great thought experiment. I can imagine the progressives thinking that over in Red America, there's nothing but, homosexuals being tied to the back of trucks and dragged through the dusty streets of our one-horse town, and the toothless rubes sitting out there in their trailer parks, drinking moonshine and talking about Jesus. Uh, Not that there's anything wrong with that, by the way. The talking about Jesus drinking moonshine part, not the dragging homosexuals behind trucks part. There's something wrong with that. Uh, but I think what would really be shocking to them would be I think the first thing that would be most noticeable about the two different countries would, I think they'd both hit you at the same time. The first thing that would hit people after a year or two would be how safe it is in Red America, how virtually, in fact, not virtually, how everybody's, living in neighborhoods where no one's breaking into houses and we don't have any crime because we enforce the laws and we hold people responsible and we're all heavily armed. So our Red America would be a much safer place and a much friendlier place. Um, it would be to the surprise of liberals, but not to conservatives. It'd be a much more compassionate place as well. You'd have far fewer homeless people in Red America, not because they'd be forced to work in the underground sugar caves, but because Red America would look at, it's turning into an interesting idea, actually. I think I might have to make a firewall out of this. Red America would look at people who are, the expression that we used to use was a good expression, down on your luck. We'd look at people who are down on their luck and we would say, okay, well, this person is suffering from alcoholism or drug abuse or just plain laziness or whatever. They didn't know how to do things. Maybe they got a divorce. People fall down sometimes. And instead of keeping them down and constantly paying them to stay down, we would find a way to help them up, and we would personalize it. We'd do it through either local charities, things like veterans offices, things like Alcoholics Anonymous, church groups, all of this stuff. We wouldn't just basically hand them a check. So I think the first thing people would notice is how much more pleasant it is to live in Red America, despite the fact that they would think otherwise. That they think that, nothing but the mean people in Red America. That's not true. Just be nothing but the courageous people in Red America. Now, a lot of smart people would go to Blue America, but I am utterly convinced that the kind of smart people that you want to be around would be in Red America. I suspect that we'll probably be seeing more scientific research done in Blue America, but the engineering in Red America would be far better. And since scientific results can be read, I'd rather have engineers with access to scientific papers than scientists who are depending on liberals to build things. So the smartest people I have ever met, and I've met a bunch of scientists and I've met a bunch of very, very deep scholars and so on, but the two smartest people I've ever met are Burt Rutan and Brent Regan. They're both conservatives. They're both engineers. They're both just extraordinarily capable people. They changed the world. I know everybody's heard of Burt. Hardly anybody's heard of Brent Regan, but Brent Regan is the smartest guy I know. And Brent has his own property, needless to say. He built his own hangar. I suspect he built his own house. I'm not sure about that, but he built his own hangar in which he built his own airplane, which won both the Workmanship and the Speed Awards at Oshkosh. It's a Lancer 360, I want to say, or 5. He's got a big engine. It's fast. It's 300-mile-an-hour airplane. It's a fast airplane built in the hangar that he built, below which, well, I'm not going to say what's below it. It's a nuclear reactor, undoubtedly. And then he's got his own airport. He put in an airstrip, and he had to fight with the government for years to get that little piece of concrete legal. And his daughter went to both of his sons are amazing. One's in the Marine Reserve, the other one's a video game developer. Terrific kids. His daughter, basically, I think when she turned 18, asked Dad if she could get a house. And what that consisted of was not, here's a house for you, honey, and then she has a temper tantrum because the stucco's not the color she wants. They went to a corner of the property, and the two of them built a house with their own two hands. They had some contractor help, but mostly it was them, and mostly it was the daughter. And I was, many years ago, Brent said, do you want to see the house? I said, sure, this will be cute, the house that the daughter's building. It's going to look like a, Lincoln log construction set, maybe a little bit bigger, big enough maybe for one room and perhaps a little bathroom attached to the back, And it's a 4-level, most beautiful house I've ever seen. Incredible open area, open ceilings, wood, very, very eco-smart in terms of insulation techniques and so on. It's because Brent and his daughter, mostly his daughter, built the house. And it's the coolest house I've ever been in. It's the most beautiful house I've seen. It's so clean, and it's so efficient, and it's so perfectly wired, and the floor is heated with underground pipes, and it's just what happens when you have a house built by two people who have IQs of 180 or whatever the case may be. I went over there and I just said, I'm not entirely sure I could put the doorknob in by myself. So that aspect of life in Red America would be much better too. I think the second thing that people would notice right away, aside from the fact that Red America is a much more pleasant, friendly place to live, I think we'd also realize right away that the entertainment quality in Red America is not what we were used to. And I can sum up my feelings on this in this way. I would rather listen to engineers sing than drive on a bridge built by professional vocalists. There are some talented conservatives out there, and we would have some entertainment, but we would have nothing like what Blue America would have in terms of the entertainment. Now, that's something that could be also remedied. And it would something I would trade in a heartbeat. I don't think Red America wouldn't be one giant community theater presentation of Oklahoma, but it would start out fairly close to that, I would imagine. We'd get most of the country musicians. I think virtually all of them. So those are extremely talented people. There are certainly enough conservative filmmakers of every single possible capacity. And my entire future model is, Merlin says I'm an engineer and I sing excellently. I have no doubt whatsoever, Merlin. I can pop a tune if I have to as well, if I practice for a year or two. But I think the biggest immediate negative would be in the quality. I was going to say in the quality of the entertainment, but the fact is, here in mixed America, there's so many progressives making so much entertainment, and we don't watch it anyway because while it's beautifully made, but most of it is beautifully made junk. Star Trek Discovery, just as an example, I can't put those two words together in the same sentence. I know somebody actually seems to like Star Trek Discovery. The whole thing is a distortion in the space time. It just shouldn't be there. It's so appalling. It's so disruptive. It's the Bolshevik revolution of the Star Trek canon. It's something that just came and happened and destroyed everything. It needs to be buried in Yucca Mountain, deep in Yucca Mountain, and we need to invent one of those Men in Black flash things so we can all just stand there and just get this thing flashed out of our mind. So I don't care how many high quality people are working on that kind of garbage. But other shows like Walking Dead and things like that are, terrific. And again, entertainment is importable in a way that bridges and security and peace of mind and politeness are not importable. Those are not things that you can go on the market and buy, but you can buy whatever entertainment you want. And they better be selling it because I'm not entirely sure what else they make. I don't think they make much of anything in terms of manufacturing. We lose an awful lot of tech people, I suspect. But again, the people that actually make these things would be there. I think the visionaries would probably end up in Red America because they at least start a new business in Red America without it bankrupting you. And the blues would probably keep all of the existing, you know, Bill Gateses and all of the Google people and all of the Facebook people and all the rest of these people that are turning into absolute tyrants. So anyway, that's kind of the overview. But the problem is, if you look at the map, the center of the country is red, as Hillary Clinton pointed out, filled with backward people who really just long for days of return to slavery and all the rest of the things she said. But any possible distribution of the country along those lines, along red and blue lines, would seem to look like we'd get the middle of the country, and the left would get the coasts, because the coasts are where the expensive real estate is, and that's where the liberal elites are, the rich lunatics. We'd feed them. That's a nice lever to have. But frankly, I don't see how you could live in a landlocked country. I don't see how you could live in the United States of America that's surrounded by the socialist states of America, where you had to overfly their territory in order to get into our territory to land, and say nothing of things like navigation of rivers and so on. I suppose if we kept Louisiana and Mississippi, we could, keep the Mississippi open and stuff. But we'd need some seaports. So I had thought about maybe a Southern California corridor where we would basically either negotiate or ask very nicely for Orange County and San Diego County. Give us a 50-mile, whatever it is, access to the sea that would allow us to keep San Diego Naval Base. Orange County is actually very smart, very sensible, beautifully run, just like you'd expect from Republicans. San Diego is probably America's most conservative large city because there's so many military people there. It still votes blue, but it's winnable. I'd love to keep. In fact, I think it's essential that we keep Pacific Base in San Diego, and I think we ought to keep Virginia and keep Norfolk, and then we'll have a Navy, and they won't. And they can confront pirates or Chinese warships with dance numbers and songs and very, very serious and impassioned diatribes that they really don't have any argument with the pirates, and that they feel a great deal of sympathy because of all they've been through and all the oppression and so on. So that's basically it. Fun to think about, but I don't know really what it is beyond that.